The following is a conversation with Andy Williams, a BAFTA-winning producer, creative director, and a thought leader of kids content in today's evolving media landscape. Welcome to the Mo Method, where we talk to creatives who have turned their passions into professions. Andy's journey is a masterclass in adapting to industry shifts, crafting beloved animated stories, and leveraging new platforms to achieve remarkable success. In this episode, Andy shares his journey from his early days at Disney Channel all the way to establishing a studio of his own. We explore the profound impact of YouTube on traditional children's entertainment, the rise of independent creators, as well as Andy's advice on embracing your passion and building your network in order to create the projects that you truly love. Without further ado, here's Andy Williams.
I'm Andy Williams. I'm a creative producer and creative director and run a company called Vamonos. I'm a BAFTA-winning animation producer for a series that I did for Disney. I've won a Writers Guild Award for writing on Shaun the Sheep for Aardman, and have had a career that started at Disney Channel in the UK, and then had a separate director and producer partnership where we worked with everyone from the BBC, Channel 4, Aardman, and Cartoon Network. And then I spent a few years back in the corporation world working for Nickelodeon and running their brand partnerships team there for about 4 or 5 years before leaving to set up on my own with a remit to developing my own animation series and IPs, and also working as a service provider for studios like Disney and Nickelodeon, and recently wrapped production on a animated series that I developed and co-produced for one of the global streamers.
Nice. So I'm curious to ask, like, you've worked with Disney and Nickelodeon, and you've won a BAFTA and amazing achievements. Like, has there been a specific moment that was kind of like a pinch me moment where you felt like, oh my God, like I must be dreaming?
Yeah, I mean, winning the BAFTA was one of those ones that was completely unexpected. And my producing writing partner at the time had left Disney, and then Disney had basically contracted us to produce an animation series for them. And we were the real outsiders on the team. We'd ended up getting our own tickets to attend because we weren't actually in-house at Disney at the time. We needed to kind of dig into our own pockets and buy a ticket to turn up. And we were on the presenters table for the people presenting the awards. And the running joke that night was that that we weren't going to win, that we were up against the BBC, Channel 4, and much bigger shows. So there's no chance of us winning. So when the presenter actually got up on stage and said, and the winner is our show, there was a moment where we were like, this is either the kind of the biggest joke and trolling ever, or we have generally won. So yeah, that was definitely a pinch me moment.
Well, what project was that for?
It was for an animation series called Brushhead, which was on a dedicated animation channel that Disney ran at the time. Didn't have a massive audience. I mean, we used to joke that potentially it doubled its audience just by the judging panel watching it at BAFTA. But it was kind of, a fantastic. I think in some ways we ended up almost getting that award partly because we were the outsiders, and I think it was as much a recognition for sort of creating something that stood out, that had a kind of relatively low budget, but that we'd managed to kind of marshal all of that stuff to produce something that they liked and responded to.
Yeah. So I'm curious to ask you. So you've been doing this for a long time, and
A long time, yeah.
and I'm sure there's been more than one, but I'm kind of curious to hear in today's landscape, like, what are some of the big changes you've seen the children's entertainment space kind of go through over your years working? And specifically, I want to focus in, like, now with YouTube, like, how much of a difference has that made in your opinion?
Massive. I mean, one of the things that I didn't mention earlier on in my introduction is that I also co-host another podcast. So it's quite funny to be on the other side of the mic. But I co-host a podcast called the Kids Media Club Podcast, and that really the focus of that and the impulse behind it was to try and make sense of the changes that the kids industry's been going through over the last well, particularly over the last kind of 10 years, it's really accelerated. But I mean, I started my career a few years before YouTube launched. And so it's fascinating to almost have that front row seat to be able to
Mhm.
see both how it's democratized the creative production for everyone on the planet, while at the same time it's been really disruptive for the established industries. And so YouTube has definitely had a kind of an enormous sort of revolutionary impact on kids media. And it's still something that the big studios and brands are sort of trying to grapple with and to try and find their own strategy to be able to accommodate that. Because one of the things that blows my mind about YouTube is facts like the most watched channel on connected TV. So that's in your living room is
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Is I think there's an assumption that it's all on mobile devices, but actually more and more it's becoming the staple of the living room.
Yeah.
And that really changes the game, I think, quite dramatically. I mean, the problem kids media has with YouTube is that there's a dilemma there, really, and the dilemma is that it's the number one channel for kids, so that's where all of the kids are. I used to work at Nickelodeon, and Nickelodeon had a mantra or philosophy that they were wherever kids were,
Mm.
and the kind of conundrum really for established brands is that if you go wherever kids are, that's YouTube now.
Yeah.
So you're getting more and more of the big established brands that are having to they've sort of conceded defeat in some respects because they've decided that we need to have a channel on YouTube.
Yeah.
We can't avoid that. But the challenge there is that, particularly in the kids space, is that big brands use YouTube as a discovery
Hmm.
platform, a place for people to discover their content. But it's very hard in the regulatory space around kids to monetize kids' content.
Yeah.
And so it becomes like a marketing device and a marketing platform, but it doesn't replace the ad revenue that those
Yeah.
big studios had on their channels. So that's one of the things that's kind of driving quite a kind of disruptive environment, really.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like what you think kind of the future holds, because it's I've been doing a lot of thought and research into this specific point.
Yeah.
And just as an example, like in terms of like for podcasting, and one thing that a lot of people are saying is that the breakout content that you're seeing across YouTube in the podcasting space are the podcasts that kind of lean into serialized content. So, for example, you have Hot Ones, and there's a show called Chicken Shop Date, right, where
Yeah.
it almost watches like a TV show. Like every time I turn it on, I know what I'm expecting, and there's a kind of a storyline that kind of overarches in the content, and it's for that exact reason, because more and more people are taking the what they call it, the sit back and watch approach versus the lean in and watch, meaning like they're like you're saying they're watching on their living room TV, sitting on the couch, not on their mobile device as they're eating breakfast or whatever it is. Um, it's interesting because the established media companies, right? Like you're saying, all their money came from ad revenue, and then of course merchandising. That's kind of a whole other
Yeah.
thing. And it's interesting because you can't really do that with YouTube. As in, when you're creating content on YouTube, you want that to be the full package deal, right? And you want to be like, oh, here's like a 5-minute teaser, and I'll go watch the rest of the show on Nickelodeon or whatever the channel is.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, like, do you think that these big channels are kind of going to fizzle out? Do you think they're going to pivot? Like, what do you think is the future for them?
Yeah. I don't know really, because a strategy that I think a lot of the big brands have started to adopt is we'll have bespoke YouTube content, but then the longer form content will be something that you'll watch on their core channel. So it's in some ways it's a way to drive traffic back to their core channel. But YouTube is such a kind of powerful environment in terms of always feeding you something else that you want to watch, that I'm not sure how easy it is to translate that kind of, to throw that fishing line out and see if you can hook enough viewers back to your channel, because I think it's just such a sticky platform, really. So I don't know. I mean, Netflix is probably the best example of a channel that has managed to kind of drive people from YouTube onto their platform. I mean, I sometimes think that when people look at YouTube, particularly for kids, they tend to look at shows like Cocomelon and a lot of shows that really was seen as being that big wave of animation that was kind of exploded on YouTube. But a lot of that growth ended up happening before something that's called the COPA regulations, which are regulations that govern how kids content is treated on social media platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant that there's kind of less revenue connected to kids content on YouTube. So I wonder, because of that, whether there's just going to still be a space for those main channels, because producers can't really get quite enough of a revenue from kids content on YouTube. So they still depend on those bigger platforms really to be able to deliver that.
Yeah, but then I do wonder if the future is one in which you have more kind of independent creators and less of the big established brands. Because again, specifically with kids content, right? As in, like you're saying, there's Netflix and there are streaming platforms that can throw big budgets into making really sought after entertainment, right, for adults.
Yeah.
But when it comes to kids content, like it's funny. I have a 3.5-year-old, and so sometimes we'll like once in a while we'll put on TV for him, and so we find things on YouTube, and you see, like I see with him, the things that attract him the most are obviously the ones that are going to be the most bright colors, and I always tell him, like, we're not watching those because a lot of times it's kind of those like stupid videos that have nothing to them. It'll be like people with like slime and like putting toy cars into it, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to put that on for you. But it's interesting 'cause that's always what he gravitates towards, right? And so the unless the parent makes the choice, right, to like, we're going to watch Netflix instead of YouTube, right? The kids are going to gravitate towards YouTube and the content that's on YouTube. And you see a lot of independent kind of brands that really just one of the prime examples that comes to mind is Blippi, right? Here's this guy who made a empire for himself, ended up selling it to Moonbug, right? And there's still all the content is being produced on YouTube for YouTube, right? But then they are having merchandise and they have all this kind of other, side thing. He had a Netflix deal, I think, even where he did like Blippi live in concert. He was doing a tour, and so I do wonder if kind of if it's kind of like a churning of like kind of the new age, and it's is it an inevitability that the larger established brands that have kind of the traditional network model in place, like, can they really survive in the YouTube generation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because there's been a lot of news about the situation for Cartoon Network, which is sort of, it feels like that's almost being kind of wound down, or it certainly doesn't exist in the same sense that it used to exist as a brand. I mean, when I look into that crystal ball, it's kind of a bit murky, really, because Blippi and the Cocomelon stuff that we've been talking about, that really exploded in a sort of a heavily regulated space for kids, and there hasn't really been a breakout kids media brand since that regulation was introduced. So I think that has had an impact. My wife's a primary school teacher, and I remember a couple of years back, she said a lot of the kids in her school were talking about a YouTuber that they'd been watching, and it was Mr. Beast. It was at the start where Mr. Beast had started to kind of take off. Now, Mr. Beast isn't producing kids content on YouTube. When he's uploading his content, he's not ticking the made for kids
Right.
because that will mean he'd get less money. But the kids are watching his stuff. So I think you're going to get a lot of creators that are going to be not specifically targeting their content at kids, but with the awareness that kids might watch their stuff. And so I
Right.
think that means that the diversity of content for specifically for a kids audience, that there isn't there isn't the revenue really to support that in the same way. So I think you'll end up having kind of kids adjacent content, stuff
Interesting.
that kids can kind of watch, but that isn't primarily developed and produced for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. So on that point, I'm curious because I noticed on your I think it's on your LinkedIn that you mentioned you want to produce a kids brand that rivals Bluey and Peppa
Yeah.
Pig. And so, like, what do you think? What do you think is that secret ingredient to like make those shows that really are kind of transcend just the TV and become this like cornerstone of a child's upbringing?
Um, I mean, I think for both Bluey and Peppa Pig, they both tapped into. I have a slight. I've cooked up a kind of theory about animated characters.
Hmm.
That's what is the DNA of a great animated character, and it's slightly half joking, but this is the checklist. Is one, they need to have. There needs to be something kind of bizarre about the character that it, if in the in the case of Peppa Pig, a family of pigs is already quite. There's something strange and odd about it that kind of sticks in your imagination. There there needs to be a kind of cute element to it, something that's playful and appealing. There's often a character that will be a bit naughty, and I think the audience, particularly kids' audience, they'll enjoy a character that will sometimes do stuff that they wish they had permission to do themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't necessarily align with Pepper and Bluey in that instance. And then they need to have something that's relatable. And then the final kind of magic part of the DNA of the character is I think they need to draw on something that's personal to the creator themselves. There needs to be it can't be just this it can't be just this recipe where you're picking in different ingredients. It needs to draw something out of the producer and the creator themselves to give it something unique and a real kind of distinctive feel to it. And I feel like both Bluey and Pepper have a lot of those combinations, but then draw on a well of something that's quite personal, relatable, and those ingredients really help them stick out. There's Chuck Jones, the creator of Bugs Bunny and
Mm-hmm.
Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. When he was creating the character of Bugs Bunny, originally it was going to be a wild hare, and he said that something to the effect that no matter how funny the character was, if he didn't understand the character, he wouldn't be able to animate it. So I think that final ingredient is that you've got to be able to pull it out of yourself in some way, so you really understand what that story is about, and that will help it stand out and be unique. And I think both Bluey and Peppa Pig have that. They're not cookie cutter shows. I mean, particularly for both for Bluey and Peppa Pig, there's probably an element where they were first introduced, where it wasn't obvious that they were going to be big hits. But I think they tapped into something that was personal, but also relatable that really made them work.
Yeah, I see that with Bluey a lot. There are a lot of like accounts on Instagram and people who kind of their whole thing is like it'll be like parents reviewing kids shows, and like
Yeah.
here's why this show is good, here's why it's not good, and they talk about things like how stimulating it is, etc., etc. And Bluey seems to be one of those shows that obviously is loved by kids, but what's even more fascinating is how much it's loved by parents who watch with them.
Yeah.
And I think it's very much for that reason. Like they create these themes that are very relatable, and
Yeah.
what's also I think really unique about Bluey that you don't see a lot in other kids content is that they tackle more sensitive topics that kids content usually shy away from, right? And you don't want to talk
Yeah.
about things that are uncomfortable, but I think that really has played a big role in Bluey's success is the fact that they do tackle those things because it's not like kids aren't exposed to negative stimuli, you know,
Yeah.
and like we kind of as adults we think like okay, but they're not aware of what's going on. As in, let's say if a kid's in a situation, there's something as in there's a situation at home, right? And a lot of times we think like oh, but the kids are kind of oblivious to it, and that's not the
Yeah.
reality, and I think that's one specifically with Blue. I think that's one thing that like they really tapped into, and that's played a huge part in its breakout success. Just again, that's just from hearing what people are saying about it. Like and it kind of
Absolutely. And I think sometimes people underestimate the power of something that has that Covian aspect to it, because you sometimes want the show to have a little bit of an edge. One is that it's actually engaging for young audiences to have to think about stuff that might be uncomfortable. So the classic episode, they did a longer episode about moving house, and I think I saw loads of stuff on social media where you'd have young children crying at the prospects that everyone's going to move house.
yeah,
But that will be an experience that children will be going through regardless of whether Bluey um, uses that as a topic or a subject for the show. And so it's interesting for them to have those experiences reflected back rather than have it too kind of guarded and safe so that they don't have to kind of encounter all of that.
yeah,
So I think definitely plays a big part in the success of that show. The other thing I find fascinating about Bluey is that there's an argument that the genres of kids shows map onto the genres of adult shows pretty well. So um, Paw Patrol is effectively a procedural cop show,
mm-hmm.
and Bluey is a sitcom. Bluey is definitely a sitcom, and it has a memory. It has a narrative memory to it that that it isn't that kind of classic network TV show format where you can more or less play the shows out of order and there'll be strippable
Yeah,
self-contained episodes. It has kind of an arc and a memory to it.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anything that's unique to Bluey? You don't think that is true
It's quite
for?
unusual. I think Bluey really sort of pioneered that. There, I'm sure there's other shows that have that, but we were talking about Peppa Pig as well, and that show was born kind of a lot earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's an element where Peppa Pig, when it started, was probably more that format where the shows could be strippable and
Mm-hmm.
self-contained stories and played relatively out of order, and it wouldn't make a huge difference. Now, in some ways, I wonder whether Pepper is slightly influenced by the rise of Bluey because they're now introducing a kind of a big narrative jump
Yeah,
where Pepper's going to have a younger sister, I think it is, and so that's a real before and after sort
yeah,
of point in a narrative. You're kind of you're definitely not going to be able to strip all of those episodes, and people
right,
aren't going to be able to tell where they come in the kind of in the timeline.
yeah.
So I think that's potentially a kind of the impact of Bluey on that.
Uh-huh. I'm curious, like at what age typically, as in kind of these outliers aside, what was kind of the philosophy of like at what age do they kind of jump from um kind of independent episodes to more narrative driven? Because like again, like thinking back to when I was a kid, to shows that again I was watching already not very low, not like that 4 to 6 range, but more let's say 8 to 10, right? And I think of kind of the animated like Teen Titans and these shows where they really were very narrative driven. Um, like at what age do you think that they kind of make that break from kind of each episode is independent to there's kind of an overarching story that carries it out?
Well, I don't actually think it's so much of an age thing, because that strippable standalone format is common for a lot of adult shows. I mean, the
Mm,
um, the Doctor Show House is a classic. That it has got a bit of a narrative memory, but you can jump around episodes and you
right.
wouldn't really know where they sit in the timeline. It's more that's more a condition of the kind of, it's more of a commercial condition, I think. It's the fact that you want to sell that show to different networks, and the networks wants to have the freedom to be able to schedule that kind of all over the shop, basically. So
Uh-huh.
because of that, you that tended to push shows to be more standalone and strippable. I mean, Friends has a bit of a narrative memory, but again, you don't have to kind of see one episode after another.
Right.
So I think that's more of a commercial condition. That changed with the streamers, basically. That's
Mm,
what really popularized the shows with sort of strong narrative memories. Apart from sitcoms have always had that.
right. Right. What do you think is kind of the advantages and disadvantages to both?
Um, I mean, the so the strippable standalone show was it was kind of born out of more of a sort of satellite network cable TV
Yeah.
environment where for instance, when I worked at Nickelodeon UK, we their Nick Junior channel, they rebranded as Peppa Pig Month, and morning to night, the whole month, every day, 7 days a week was just Peppa Pig.
Uh,
So to make that work, you're sort of you're sort of abandoning the idea of the show having a narrative memory at that point anyway, um, because you've got so many shows, you've got to kind of
right.
you don't want to just have them one after another. You're going to be scheduling them kind of not at random, but definitely non-linearly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and because of that appetite for lots of content around a show, there was that drive to get to 100 episodes, because then you could sell that to networks and you could
Mm,
syndicate it, and that's where the real money came from. So the strippable standalone definitely has that advantage commercially, if you're talking about like cable or satellite TV, because there's that appetite to really schedule lots of shows and do stunt themed days. For the narrative show, that I mean that's like the power of the soap, is that you want to
yeah.
know what happens next. You're kind of really invested in these characters, and you want to know what their journey is going to be. So it's so your timeline is longer, really. You're not just looking to be entertained for half an hour. You're kind of invested in to where these characters are going.
Yeah. Definitely. Um, and kind of in the same vein, but shifting gears just a little bit, I wanted to focus on a specific project, and that is Shaun the Sheep.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
I loved that show when I was younger. I remember it. I really enjoyed it. And one thing that I find really interesting about Shaun the Sheep is that it was totally there was no dialogue, right? It's all
yeah,
visual. So I'm kind of curious to hear from you, like, how did that? I'm sure that was challenging to kind of not work with
yeah.
dialogue, and then how did that kind of help shape your approach to storytelling through visuals alone?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. So that was something that we're part of a writing team. We were, my writing partner and I were brought on to write 4 episodes. And yeah, like you said, it was to suddenly have to switch your attitude to a show where you couldn't pull on that lever that would be dialogue or a kind of funny line, that it all had to be delivered visually. It was a really good kind of learning point for us, because there was that, particularly with animation, I feel like animation has a visual imperative, that as much as you can tell that story visually, the better. And and to almost have it so you had one hand tied behind your back and you could only tell the story visually, it was yeah, it was a really interesting experience, and I think it made for the reason that show really works is that the visual comedy is so strong, and that there's something just so delightful about stop motion animation
Yeah.
to just really be able to focus on the animation and the action and the character designs and that world that Aardman have created. I mean, it was fabulous. We went down, worked in a writer's room, saw the studio, and there's an element where it felt a bit like you're in a studio Hollywood lot, but it's
Yeah.
just all of the stars were about that big.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it was great.
The Aardman, some of their movies were like Chicken Run was probably one of my favorite movies. As like it was, I would say one of the most impactful movies I saw as a very young kid. And I've
Amazing.
always loved stop motion animation. There's something about it that's just so tactile and so beautiful.
Yeah,
Obviously, there's Leica and Aardman. Those are kind of two, I'd say, the two powerhouses in the game. And it's just, there's something about it. It's spectacular. Um, I'm curious, like just on the point with this kind of visual storytelling. Um, it's interesting because I heard an interview with Mr. Beast. What's his name? Jimmy Donaldson, I think's his name.
yeah,
Um, and he was talking about creating viral content and kind of creating content that
yeah.
does really well. And it was in an interview that was there's a show Colin and Samir. It's a podcast on
Oh, yeah,
YouTube,
yeah,
and so they were interviewing Mark Zuckerberg, and then Jimmy like joined in like halfway through the conversation, and so one point that he was saying was that the most viral content that he has on Instagram are is anything that doesn't have any dialogue to it. He said because as soon
right.
as you start talking in English, right, all of a sudden you're alienating a huge percentage of the world, right? Because most people in the world
Yeah,
don't speak English, and so it's kind of an interesting thing to explore. Of like, I wonder if kind of that visual, without dialogue, is storytelling in animation and in whatever kind of short form YouTube content or whatever, that like it could really kind of be very advantageous to create a show that's kind of not just a cultural phenomenon in the Western world or in the English
yeah,
speaking world, but kind of could really have a more global and outsized impact.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can, um, as a writer, you of a show, you end up having kind of, you see the residuals and the royalties for stuff. And it's amazing to see the legs that Shaun the Sheep has because it travels everywhere,
Yeah.
and it has that appeal. I mean, one of the a friend of mine is works on Mr. Bean, which is
Hmm.
the animated version of the TV show, and that has exactly the same qualities. It's effectively a silent comedy.
Yeah.
It doesn't really have any real dialogue to speak of, but it means that it has a universality to it, and it can really travel.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see kind of. I wonder if like we'll see more of it. Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't know. But like I'm just thinking in terms of like for short form content. Like I had this discussion with somebody recently about creating kind of short form content optimized for, um, like Instagram Reels, and it's kind of
Yeah,
these really short content. And then shortly after having this conversation, I actually saw an account. I found this account that is doing just that. They're making this kind of anime style animations
right.
that are all kind of 60 seconds or less, and it's serialized, like as you kind of go through it. And I don't know if that'll be kind of the future, but I think that like that'll definitely it'll be interesting to kind of experiment with that. And so again, kind of applying that, you know, nonverbal, just visual storytelling with short form content, I think you could like really create super viral media that, and whatever it is, with whether it's comedy, it could be action, it could be drama,
Yeah,
you really kind of do anything with it. It's kind of just a cool, I'm just thinking out loud here.
yeah,
um,
absolutely. I mean, the irony was the show that we produced for Disney that won a BAFTA, Brushhead. That was kind of effectively Mr. Bean. It was
uh,
a main character, the no dialogue, and he would always get into, basically he'd create kind of well-meaning disasters and sort of finds that but at the end of it would still come out of it okay. But it was very
yeah,
much the Mr. Bean thing where suddenly everything would kind of
yeah,
turn into a complete sort of nightmare, but then somehow at the end of it, it would be fine.
Yeah, yeah. Those are always fun. Like you think back to like there's just a lot of kids content. Like I mean, there's the book series Amelia Bedelia, right? Like all these. It's kind of it's a classic trope that works really well. It's really fun, and it's kind of fun
It
to play
is.
with, and
Yeah.
makes for good comedy too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got that thing where I think a lot of comedy um, o- is about playing with the audience expectation. So it's
Yeah,
that thing where the tension mounts up because you imagine something bad is going to happen, and then the release of the laughter is the bit where you fulfill that, you
yeah.
deliver on that expectation.
You close that loop.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to ask you because in your career you've worked in a lot of different mediums, right? You've worked on
yeah,
TV and film and also live, like plays. Is that correct?
yeah. I'm involved in a theatre company that partners with theatre producers. But
Uh huh.
that's a slightly kind of that's definitely more of a kind of producer
Hmm.
role than it's about finding projects and kind of
Uh huh.
helping to deliver
Facilitate.
those. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. This, again, specifically focusing on children's content. Um, the difference, the similarities and differences between those different mediums, because I think each one is so powerful and so strong. Again, just drawing on my own childhood. Like
Yeah.
you think about going to the movies is a kind of its own experience, and watching TV is its own experience. And then going to see where Disney on Ice, let's say, or these kind of live performances. Each one is so powerful in its own way. Um, like I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts about the similarities, the differences, and do you think one kind of reigns supreme?
And which formats are you talking about then in terms of the differences? Do you mean
Like
between
TV,
TV and
film,
film or?
and live action. Not live action,
Okay.
but live performance.
Yeah, I mean they deliver very different experiences really. I think film you want that sense of spectacle and that big canvas that you're working across. Um, for TV, you have that sort of ability to have that continuing storyline where you just you just carry the audience along with you over a long period of time. So you get that with a great TV format like Bluey or Peppa Pig. There's an element where you become part of their memories and
Mm,
their day-to-day lives, and you're on that journey with them. So if you have that ability where, I mean, Peppa Pig will have people that remembered seeing that when they were kids and now showing their kids that show.
yeah,
And then a TV series has the ability to really tap into that. For theatre, it's that kind of shared experience. It's that feeling that you're not just going to be, that it's a one-off, that you're not
hmm,
just going to be able to kind of rewind and watch it again, that every experience is different, that
yeah,
even if you're seeing the same play 1 week later or the same musical a week later, the it will be different somehow. The performances will be slightly different. The atmosphere will be slightly different. It has that feeling where it can change kind of day by day.
yeah,
Whereas with film and TV, they're they have the ability for somebody to feel like they can really kind of perfect that vision and say, okay,
yeah,
that's exactly how I want it to be remembered, and let's stick a pin in it there.
yeah,
Um, with theatre and live experience, it's going to be more fluid than that.
yeah. Which do you think is the most impactful for children?
Um, it's hard to measure that really. I mean, I think in terms of, I mean, impact sort of suggests that it will be kind of that one-off big kind of flash, and I think then the experience of that kind of big canvas of a film, um, that has a really kind of powerful impact. But then a TV series has an ability to establish a sort of a sort of close relationship with the viewer. So
Yeah,
it may be not as impactful, but it it may sustain longer or kind of
Yeah.
build deeper connections.
Yeah. No, I hear that for sure. Yeah. And that reigns true. I think like you think back to shows you grew up on, and like those definitely have a special place on your heart that
Yeah.
it's unique to a TV series. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe less so now, but there's also that thing with the TV experience where it's it kind of it embeds into the habits and your routines
Mm.
in a way that a film or theatre won't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. Like I feel like you come out of a movie or a theater, like you kind of almost still live in that world, but it kind of fizzles out
Yeah,
very quickly. Whereas with TV, it kind of really, impacts day to day in a different sort
yeah.
of way. Yeah, definitely, definitely.
I mean,
But
how about for you? What's made the most impact for you? Do you think in terms of your experiences?
I think for me personally, I would say that I'm a little bit surprised that you didn't say this, so that's why I was curious to hear. But I think the most impactful is live theater. I think there's
Yeah,
something about that is, and again, this is not just for consumable media for me. Like this is kind of true for all entertainment. Um, like for me, my favorite thing has always been like theme parks, right? Like experiential
yeah,
entertainment. For me, there's something about that is the immersiveness that you get with that you just simply can't get with anything else. I mean, like
yeah,
I think back when I was a kid, I was probably maybe 6 or 7 years old. My parents took us to see Lion King on Broadway,
yeah.
and
Amazing,
is
fabulous show.
incredible, absolutely incredible. And there's like one memory that, first of all, I've always loved animals, so for me, like it was like
Yeah,
that already has a special place. And there's this one memory that like really sticks with me to this day, and that is at the beginning, when the Simba is born, they're kind of showing him off to the kingdom, and so they have all the animals like walk through the aisles,
yeah.
and I still remember like seeing this elephant like walking through the aisles, and it was just like and I knew that it wasn't a real elephant. Like I could see it's a costume, but still, just the experience of that was so like I don't even know how to like not
Oh,
magical,
it's
like
yeah.
magical.
It was,
Like
no,
I'm saying, just
I
say
think it is. I think it is magical, and I love that show. That
yeah,
for me, there's an element with it's got Julia Taymor, who's the creator that they brought in to make the Lion King musical, where I felt that in some ways Disney maybe didn't have enormous expectations for what the show was going to be, so she had a lot of creative freedom, and and I think the puppetry and the fact that they're obviously puppets, um, I think that makes it kind of more magical because I think one of the things that I really love in film, animation, theatre is that I think if there's a gap between the realism and the artifice, that actually that makes it's a bit like an audience in a magic trick, suspending
yeah,
disbelief. It actually makes it more powerful because the audience they're pouring their creativity and imagination into that experience as well. And so that really brings it to life. And I think it it does they did a fantastic job with that musical, that it really found a way to invite the audience into this kind of participatory creative experience. Yeah, I love that
yeah.
show.
Yeah, and just everything about the costumes also, they're just so beautiful. Like just I one time I saw like a behind the scenes, like a YouTube video behind the scenes, and they're kind of showing the puppets up close, and just the details and the artwork of it was just
Yeah.
absolutely gorgeous in a way. Like it's really a piece of art, and it's
Oh,
and
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And it's I mean the other thing, just from a commercial point of view, it's I mean the amount of revenue the live show has generated,
yeah,
I think it dwarfs what the movie made
really,
by multiples. I mean,
wow,
incredible how popular that show is.
yeah. And I mean, that was. I was privileged to see a lot of Broadway. My parents, are very into art, and that was definitely one of the most like impactful live performances I've ever seen. It
Yeah,
was just there's nothing like, and all the Disney Broadway performances are excellent. They really
yeah,
do an amazing job.
absolutely.
But that was kind of, I think that really also was kind of set the precedent for all the other ones. Where they're like, oh, like there's something here, like this is really, we're onto something.
There is that for me stands as sort of above the others in a way, because I feel like the other musical shows that Disney did, they, I think that they feel like they have to be quite faithful to the original
Mm.
movies,
Hmm.
and they don't have the same extent of creative freedom, at least in the ones that I've seen. They're quite faithful adaptations, and I feel like you need to find something that makes it, we could only do this in the theater, and I think they really found that with the
Yeah.
Lion King.
Yeah. There's one musical Broadway performance I saw that was actually surprisingly really good was Shrek the musical. I don't know if you've ever seen
Oh
it.
yeah.
It
No,
was
I haven't
actually
seen that one.
like like I remember when we went to go see it, kind of like thinking to myself like, okay, like this is a little weird, but like let's give it a shot. And I was actually like, I was really surprised at how well executed it was. And
Great.
like it was, yeah, it's funny, like like it's kind of unexpected, but then it kind of exceeds expectations because it's such a low bar of expectations.
Yeah.
Like really was able to, and it was phenomenal. Like even like my mom, like she came out of that and she was like, that was really good.
Amazing.
Just yeah,
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 it's always funny when people say that was really good, but there's just a slight element of surprise in that.
yeah,
Like I wasn't expecting that to be great, but it was really, really
yeah,
good.
yeah.
How did they adapt it to the stage? Were there things that were very different from the stage experience?
So I'm trying. It was a long time ago. Like just the one thing that like stands out that was different from like that adapted, and they did a cool job with it, was at the beginning of the play they they had like Shrek as a kid. And so
Yeah,
there's this moment. It was like, and whatever the song was, whatever. And there's one point where he goes in as a kid. He walks into his, iconic outhouse, and
right.
like he walks in as a kid, and then like he like bursts out like as like the full grown. It was just like it was a cool transition. So like they definitely took creative liberties. But it was just it was really well done, and it was very funny also. Like they really kind of pulled on the comedic aspects of the movie, and it really like it was surprisingly good. I highly recommend it if it's ever if it's ever around
That's
again. Like,
great.
yeah, yeah. I was disappointed. I really wanted to see. At one point, I wanted to see the Spider-Man when it was on Broadway, but I
Yeah,
never
because that was
never got a
Julia
chance.
Taymor as well.
Which one?
So Spider-Man was the same creator as Lion King.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That one didn't do as well though.
Yeah, I think that was quite one of the. I mean, theatre can be brutal because I think that. I mean, I think that cost something like, yeah, a lot of money, millions
Yeah.
and millions and millions. Um, and I think it was. I think it was only on in Broadway for a couple of weeks,
Yeah, well, there
and
was
so I
I think
think.
two of the actors got one of them. I think even died, and one of them like, got like
Oh, really?
severely injured. Yeah, because they were doing all these stunts where they were
Wow.
like flying
Yeah.
over the audience, and at least on two occasions, the actors had like got somehow disconnected from the harness or whatever it was, and so I think that it
Wow.
got pulled pretty quickly. It was there was one time that we were in New York, and it was kind of we were deciding between Spider-Man and another. I forgot what the other one was. We ended up going with the other one, and then like shortly after Spider-Man got pulled, I was like, oh well, there goes that opportunity. Yeah,
Yeah, I
but
don't think I don't I don't think that's going to be being revived anytime soon.
yeah, yeah, I
But
would I
yeah,
would
I
think
mean, I
so.
think they certainly went for it.
Yeah, listen, that's show business, right? You got to take
Yeah,
big swings, and sometimes those
yeah,
big swings are big misses.
yeah. It was definitely a big swing. What was
Yeah,
it? You two did the music, and
it was like a really like high value production, and like they
yeah,
really and it made headlines. Like it was a big deal, but then just kind of led to a few disasters, and that was the end of that.
yeah. I wonder whether I just, I mean, even if everything had worked on it, I just don't know whether people want to see a Spider-Man musical.
Right, right. And also part,
That's my main problem with it.
yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting, like
And I'm a
adapting that
massive
sort of
Spider-Man
genre.
fan.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it's just like, but I've never thought what I really want to see is Spider-Man as a musical.
right, right. No, it's I think it's like tricky to adapt that sort of IP into a Broadway, any kind of, not even a musical, just any kind of live performance.
Yeah.
I've never seen it, but like another example is like the Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
which
that was also kind of
worked really well.
yeah, but that was also a big creative risk where it's like this could go really
Oh
well,
yeah,
this could go really poorly,
yeah,
because you're playing with, first of all, a beloved IP. So that's A.
yeah,
Anytime you deal with a beloved IP, you're taking a big risk. And then when you're dealing with things that are very action oriented, like it's it's hard to translate that from the screen with all the visual effects that you have to
yeah.
the stage where you kind of have to get creative with the visual effects. And yeah, no, like just as an example, like if they ever made like a Star Wars on Broadway, like I don't see that going over very well.
I know. Yeah, you kind of feel like each medium has its own qualities that it can draw on, and some
Yeah,
work really well with different properties. And Star Wars, you sort of feel like it's made for TV and film. It doesn't
yeah,
really. I don't
yeah,
really think it would gain from being transferred to Broadway or the West End.
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
No, for sure.
going back to the Harry Potter thing, I think one of the things that made it work was that the stage version was a different chapter in a story,
Hmm.
and
Not an
the for
adaptation.
yeah, so real fans of Harry Potter, if they wanted to experience that chapter of the of the ongoing story of Harry Potter, they kind of had to see the stage show.
Yeah, yeah,
So in some ways, it fulfilled that. Going back to that soap opera narrative arc thing, it fulfilled that what happens next impulse.
yeah. Also, what's interesting is that even the book was written as a play, as in so it wasn't even a book being adapted to a play. It was written with the
Oh
theater
yeah,
stage in mind.
it was quite intentional, wasn't it? It
Yeah,
was it was very much like this is how we're going to approach it, and I
yeah,
think it's a reflection on having a original creator that has a lot of power to be able to
right,
do it
right,
exactly how
right,
she sees it.
right. Which is, I think, kind of in a lot of ways unique to her. It's I'd say it's unique to authors. I think, right, as in
Yeah,
like when you when you're writing a book, it gives you, in a lot of ways, gives you the most creative freedom, right? Because you're
yeah,
not beholden to a studio
yeah,
who's expending a huge budget on it, right? There's still the publisher, but the author publisher relationship is very different than the showrunner and executive
yeah,
relationship you get in TV and movies. So, and you see that with other creators as well. You see that with George R. R. Martin. You see that with Brandon Sanderson. You see these other kind of huge authors that are extremely popular, kind of on a almost like movie scale,
yeah,
but through books, and they really do kind of get to keep that freedom, like in their work. In fact, just as an aside, with Brandon Sanderson, I one time heard that there was talks about making like a theme park based off of his books, which is like
really.
it was like kind of unheard of, but like he has the following for it, like he could, if anybody could do it, it'd be kind of his IP. But
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, it's he's got a tremendous following. It's yeah, he puts out a lot of content as well. But yeah, it's interesting that kind of dynamic that exists in the written text. That
yeah. And I think for those creators, actually, it's going to be an interesting period in turn that we're moving into.
yeah,
Is that I think there's something that this is almost as by way of an example, and it's a bit of a digression, but I saw an interview with a stand-up comedian who said that when he started his career, that the name the way of the game would be that a channel or a broadcaster would come to him and say, "We think you're really talented. We'd love to introduce your talent to our huge TV audience."
yeah,
And he said, "What's happened in the 10, 20 years is that now the broadcaster or the channel will come up to the comedian and say, 'You're really talented, but more importantly, you have 10 million Instagram followers, and
right,
we'd love to introduce your followers to our TV channel.'" And
yeah,
I think that shows the power of artists that have a big following, And
Yeah.
I think we're going to be in a period where more and more they're going to have a lot of power and sway, whether it's um I mean, whether it's a book author or somebody that's managed to have establish a kind of string of TV
Yeah.
hits, that if you have a fan base you know will follow you to your next project,
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of the entertainment industry is going to be heading more and more.
Absolutely. I've been putting actually a tremendous amount of focus on that exact point because we really do live in the era of the independent creator where, just as an example, like if you go ahead and create an animated, just because context of animation, create an animated show and direct it, and release it direct to YouTube, and it
Yep.
gets very well received by viewers. And all of a sudden now you have, 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and people are watching your show. All of a sudden you could take that show and you kind of have the leverage of saying, hey, like I have something working here. And so it's not like the old guard where it's like people would get approached, or not even get approached, people would approach studios to try and get hired, and they kind of would get chewed up and spit out and be like, okay, like we'll kind of take you, we'll,
Yeah.
we'll take your talents and then pay you the bare minimum. And now it's kind of like the we're seeing this seismic shift where the creators have the ability to create and sell direct to consumers, and then they have the ability to then go and make deals with studios and have that leverage
Totally.
that, and it's something that I think.
Totally. It's no longer proof of concept, it's proof of audience now as well.
Yeah, yeah. And proof of audience is that proof of concept. And then you say, look, people like what I'm
Yeah.
doing, and you don't need to kind of get it approved by somebody who doesn't really have that kind of any kind of creative talent. They're kind of just calling the shots because of their position, and that's like, no, like I know this works because I made it and people like it. And some people
Yeah.
don't even need to go to studios. Some people are just selling direct to consumer, and that's their whole business model right there. And they're supporting themselves
Totally.
comfortably, and it's, yeah, I think that's really, that's something that I've been personally focused on a lot, of like trying to kind of tap into that, because I think that I think it's kind of an inevitability of where things are heading.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's definitely the where the traffic's going.
yeah. Which, and I personally, I'm all for it.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
exciting.
yeah. I'm just curious. I know we're kind of running short on time, but it's one thing I do want to touch upon, and that is kind of how you got into this business in the first place. We kind of been talking shop, but like, how did you get started?
Yeah, so I did like an arts degree, did a short film art college that was picked up by the BBC and was part of they did something at the time called 10 by 10, where they picked 10 student films in the UK, and mine was one of those. And then worked freelance for a short period of time, like working as a runner and on a movie, and then doing low budget pop videos on the side, and managed to then find a way into Disney Channel, and then worked there for about 4 or 5 years in their promos and short form department. And that was amazing. That was like a fantastic train set to be let loose on, because had an opportunity to work with animation, shot on film, um, did a magazine, pop magazine format show, weekly show for Disney as an in-house producer, exec produced an award show for them. And so there was an element where it almost felt like, even though Disney was a huge brand, Disney Channel UK almost felt a bit like a startup, that if you were interested and had an idea and had an appetite to really get involved, there'd be lots of toys that you could play with.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for about 4 or 5 years, met a writing producing partner, and then left Disney to set up on my own. But that's how I got started. And Disney Channel was kind of definitely a big part of that.
Mm-hmm. Was this something you always wanted to do? Like when you grew up, were you always interested in kind of film and TV and
Yeah, I was the geeky kid that liked, I bought a lot of comics,
yeah?
watched a lot of TV, and went to see a lot of films. So yeah, I was
So it was
that
like
kid.
a lifelong dream.
Yeah.
So what kind of advice would you give to people who are kind of in that same kind of starry-eyed, starting out, maybe entering school or just leaving school and kind of want to make their way in the industry? What kind of advice would you give to them?
Make stuff. I mean, there's no barrier to just kind of getting stuff done and making stuff. Hustle as much as you can. I think when you're younger, people are often end up having a fear of judgment, that they're worried about doing something, and I feel like it's still the shadow of the playground. You know what I mean? They're worried about the judgment on their actions. Ultimately, nobody cares as much as you do about that, and really you'd be much better off just kind of getting out there. Maybe you'll do something and it won't go as well as you hoped, but it will just be experience that you can then kind of feed into your next thing. So get out there, meet people, whether it's online or in person, and if you're creative, make stuff. There's sometimes I think people end up having that thing where, oh, I really want to be creative, and it's like there's literally no barrier to being creative now. There may be a barrier to an audience, but there's no barrier to actually making stuff and being creative. So there aren't really any excuses. So
Yeah.
if you wanna be creative, make stuff, and then go out and meet people in the industry, hustle, talk to people. Um, yeah, that would be my advice.
So do you think there's like a specific like skill set that people should focus on, or kind of just pursue whatever creative endeavor that you enjoy?
Oh, I mean, ultimately, it's the sort of Venn diagram, isn't it? Of what do you feel like you're naturally good at, and what is there a market for? And if you can
Yeah.
find that sweet spot, that's kind of a good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Um, One last question, then it's the question I try to pose to all my guests, and that is, how do you define success?
Um, how do you define success? Being able to earn a living doing what you love, really. I think that's as successful as you can hope for, really.
Yeah. Wonderful. Where can everybody find you online, your podcast and social media and all the good
Um,
stuff?
so my podcast is the Kids Media Club podcast. So if you just Google that, we're on all of the platforms, all of the podcast platforms, and also just started a YouTube channel for that called the Kids Media Club. I'm mostly on LinkedIn. That's kind of probably my main industry platform. So you can find me on there as Andrew Williams. And yeah, those are kind of the main places that I could point to, really.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful conversation.
I know I've really enjoyed it. So thanks
Yeah.
so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.